Hi, everybody. I know I've met a few of you, but my name is Jennifer Natali, and I'm the Behavioral Sciences Librarian in Belk Library. And I apparently am the newcomer to this group. I've not been here quite 2 years at Appalachian. So, and Emery and I really came up with this idea when we were meeting in another meeting and realized how different our approaches were to Google Drive. So I'm excited to kind of share our completely different approaches, and I'm a self-professed kind of organization person. I might have been a professional organizer in another life, I guess. I don't know. So that's me.
And I am not a professional organizer in another life, but I do work in Learning Technology Services, which is part of the Center for Academic Excellence. I work primarily now with the college ed, and that's probably why I've roped so many of my college ed folks into these kinds of sessions. Jen and I are also in a Google Lunch and Learn group that's been meeting for a couple of different semesters, and we also sort of do that with Ben and Crystal and others in this room as well. But our focus really has kind of been on thinking about the ways that we can solve problems. Like I think that's our kind of role in Google, is that we're trying to solve problems. And I think one of the problems that we saw, and I've heard at least from a handful of you in this room, is that Google Drive is a different way of sort of organizing, a way that maybe we're not entirely sort of comfortable with. So I think what we're going to again try to provide is a contrasting view of how to organize your Google Drive. I think the first step for me is that I kind of think about the cost of visual clutter. So with Google Drive, one of the things that while I haven't organized it nearly in the capacity that Jen has, I've tried to think about what's in front of me and how much of my sort of Google Drive is being sort of taken up by that scroll of death. Like where you just keep going and going and going and going. And, there's copies of files, and there's files that you're not exactly sure where they came from or who they belong to, but they're still in there. And I've tried to sort of think about getting those things out of my face. So when I show you my Google Drive in a moment, it looks as though I don't have as much in there, but a lot of it is I'm moving things into folders. My organizational structure is probably a lot different than Jen, but I think what we both agree on is you just don't want to have a Google Drive where the first thing you go into is you see that you've got 9 million files that are all listed sort of straight down. The next part of this is that I'd like to sort of propose to you that one of the things that Google does really well is search, based on being a really successful search engine. So with Google Drive, I quickly got away from what I used to do on my machine, which was try to come up with a hierarchy of folders. I think Jen will still sort of demonstrate the value in doing some of that. But what I try to do is think about the types of queries that I can set up that will allow me to quickly get the stuff. So the screen, I don't know how many of you have immersed yourself in this, but if you click on that little drop-down screen for the search, in Google, you often get all of these search modifiers. So I can quickly go into this, and even though I can't remember where in the world that Google Slides presentation that Crystal shared with me a year ago, I don't remember where I put it. I can maybe quickly say, show me all Google Slides, show me owner Crystal Dean, and then even if I can figure out some of the words that might have been used in it. This is a way that I've gotten around trying to remember where I put stuff, because I'm really not that good at that. What I would find is that I wasn't always as thoughtful as I'd like about what I named the folders or named the files. But most of the time, I can remember the context for the file, like who shared it with me, around what time it was, what kind of file it was. So I got really, I think, pretty good at using these types of modifiers within the sort of the Google Drive. I will quickly show you what I'm talking about. So this is my Google Drive. One of the things that Google's recently done is it has a lot of the stuff up here that's your recent files, stuff that you've recently been working on. And you'll see that these are the uncategorized files at the bottom. This up here in the corner, I don't know how well you guys can see that, but there's a switch here for list view versus grid view. So you can switch back and forth between these two, and sometimes this does a lot to help. I'm not saying one is any better than the other, but just knowing that you can take this view and change it. So if I'm looking at it and it says grid view, I have to click in it to enter into that view. I find that this is a little easier for me to manage. I can see the files and the folders a little bit better. I can get the previews. So if you're not using the grid view, you may want to check that out just to see if that makes it feel a little bit more organized. And then what I would suggest is that I have a lot of folders that are very generic sounding, projects 2018. This one says readings, resources, and scans. I have a folder that just has generic stuff that I'm working on with faculty. So my folders are these umbrella terms, right? They don't really drill down in any kind of specifics. But what I'm banking on is that if I have, if I have an opportunity to come up here, I can pretty quickly decide that I'm going to look for a sort of presentation that's been shared with me. I can look at owned by me, not owned by me. If I can't remember who actually shared it with me, but no, it wasn't mine, I can go with not owned by me. A specific person is typically what I try to start looking for, is like, what can I do to find a specific person? And if you just start typing in the name, it's going to try to predict within the university, within our domain, a lot of the other sort of users that it would suggest. So if I'm searching for a presentation with Tracy, then it's going to save me a lot of time where I'm trying to figure out, where exactly did I put that presentation? What was I working on with her? Did I put that inside of the FCS meeting folder? Did I put that inside of conference and presentations? So I guess as part of a summary of my approach, I've really gotten away from where I'm putting things in a way that would probably not make some people comfortable, because I'm just kind of throwing them into buckets. I don't know what's inside the bucket, but I have it in a bucket somewhere. And what I've spent more time considering is Google will help me find this, that if I can remember little details about it, that's a better use of my time than me clicking through and trying to remember where I put those. And what it's allowed me to do is to get all that stuff out of my face. So in the same way that I kind of try to go with an inbox zero approach with email, where I'm just trying to get email out of my inbox so that it's not making me feel sort of anxious when I open it up and there's like 900 messages waiting for me. I'm kind of doing the same thing with Google Drive. In the chat, Tracy said, when you find it with the search, can you determine which bucket it's in? Yeah, you can. Absolutely. There's yep, Jen nailed it. You click on it, it's going to give you the sort of the path up at the top. It'll show you which bucket it ended up in. But for me, the approach has been, I'm not going to think about where I'm putting it or what I'm naming it. I'm thinking more about that context. But that is a very different approach than my friend and valued colleague and secret project manager, Jenn and I. So Jen, do you want me to share these slides or?
Sure. So I think Emery and I are both using similar techniques, but we tend to rely on, one way or another. For me, it's all about speed. So it's whichever way is quicker for you is probably the better way to do it. So for Emery, he's figured out a way, that the search function is much quicker for him. I still have this very old school pre-internet mindset of, that file cabinet that I had in my office, and that's how I organized everything. And that has always worked really well for me. So I really have maintained that in my electronic files. And I really have organized folders, and I'll show you that as well. So one of the things that goes into that is, in order to be able to find things in your file, you really need to think about naming conventions. You may open up your Google Drive and you may find some of these generic files, that it says it's unnamed, or, it's some gobbledygook of numbers, and you wouldn't even know what that is or be able to search for something because it's got an unconventional name. So that is one thing I really think about, is I think about keeping things abbreviated, organizing them into files. The naming conventions are also going to really help when you are searching. So I'll show you some examples of thinking about abbreviated names so that when you do search, you might be able to find them as well. So I'm going to share my screen, Emery. Okay, so this is my Google Drive, and you'll notice I like the list view, and I have things organized in just a handful of folders and really try to keep them in a hierarchy. So when I do want to find files, I really do have to drill down into a number of clicks, but that works for me. It kind of makes sense. So a really good example is I'm on a lot of committees, so I have a committee folder, and then within that I have all the different committees that I'm on. This is a really good one, Employee Appreciation Committee. So one of the things that I think about is meeting notes and agendas and trying to find these. So this is a great example of a naming convention, is I've given my committee a brief, acronym. It's EAC, so I know when I'm searching I might find that more quickly. And the other thing you might notice is dates. When you have lists of things like meeting minutes or agendas, if you keep them organized in a particular way, it's easier to browse when you look at them. So you'll notice on the dates, if you put the year and then the month and then the day, it stays organized in date order. So this is something that I'm really conscious of doing, especially as committees go on longer and longer and there are a lot of minutes. That's something that I really like to do. So that keeps me organized. Back to the slides. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about was this idea that we end up with files that have names that are unrecognizable. Is we can scan our scan PDFs, or maybe a PDF that's attached to an email or an email itself. You can save that into Drive, which I think for me is really helpful. It helps me when I'm trying to find something and I'm in a meeting across campus or I'm home on a snow day. I'm able to look up information and not have to search for it in multiple places. So this is something that Emery and I really talked about too, is Google Drive has become this one-stop shop where this is where I save everything. So just know that if you go to print a PDF or an email, you'll have the option where normally it'll have your printer listed here, and you can change that destination to Google Drive and save that into Google Drive. And I'll show you an example of that. So for example, in my email, so if I have a very important email that I want to find and save later, I can send this to print and just change my location to Google Drive. And this is great. If an email has important information that you really want to utilize, save it into your file structure, save it into your organization. So this is part of the organizing. When you save it, it's like, okay, great, it's in Google Drive. Well, if I go back to my Google Drive, this is a really nice feature of this quick access bar that we have now, is typically if you scan something or send something to Google Drive, now it will come up as the first thing that you sent into your Google Drive. So you can see when you save an email, it just comes in generic. It says it's an app state email. So what I do is immediately take another couple seconds and either right-click or go into the document. Sorry, it's a little bit different on my home screen here. Oops. There we go. So I immediately go in and I rename that, and I name it to something that makes sense, and then I move it into a folder that makes sense. So that's one of the ways that I organize so I don't end up with all of these generic files, because that's one of the downfalls of the search function, is if it's not named something you can find, you'll have a hard time with that, and it'll create a lot of problems. So that's one of my tips that I use in order to keep organized. Another thing that I really like to do is I like to make sure that when files are shared with me, that I add them into my own drive. So again, I don't have to worry about finding them in the shared folders or remember who shared them or when. If you just go in and look for the little drive plus sign, I add them into my own file structure. And that way they are in what makes sense to me. So if it's something that was shared that relates to a committee, I put it into my committee folder. So I really would encourage you to consider that with your shared folders. It can be a little bit confusing sometimes. People struggle to find it, or they try to remember an email that was shared and find something that was connected to an email. I just save it right into my Google Drive. So again, if something's shared, I just simply click on it and then I add it to my own Google Drive. So that's another one of my tips. Okay, so Emery, you were going to talk about stars.
I think I like the stars because it's a way of sort of designating something as being special, even in the short term. So the idea, you can even see up in the screen share that Jen just did, that beside the sort of folder, you see that there's a little file, or there's a star that's being lit up. And within your drive, you even have a section there that has been designated as everything that you have starred. So I use the stars as a way to kind of focus on things that I immediately need to work on. So a lot of the stuff that I have in Google Drive is all reference material. It's all stuff that I have in case I ever need it. And maybe I can go through with my clever little search terms and find something because I don't remember what I named it. But the starred stuff really is the stuff that I feel like has ascended to the point where it's on my to-do list. It's something I'm working on now. And you can see within Jen's drive, the webinar Google Drive slides are something that we both have starred right now because it's something that we're working on for this session today. After today's session, I'll keep this as an archive and as a record of our doing this together, but I'll take it out of my stars and it'll go back into kind of the place and drive where I'm just keeping stuff as reference. So if you have things that you're working on, but you're having a hard time figuring out you don't want to put them all in one folder because maybe they're not related to each other, but they are urgent in the sense that you are working on them currently. I found stars as another way to designate things as being common, important things that I don't necessarily have all in one folder. Would you say that's how you're using them as well, Jen?
Yeah, I absolutely am. You can see I only have 4 things in my starred folder, and it's things I am working on immediately right now. And just like you said, I'll move them out into other files as soon as they're off of my current to-do list. So absolutely. This is a little used tool, I think. It sits there, but most of us haven't really noticed that it was there. And it's a great way to really quickly get to whatever you're working on right at the moment.
Absolutely.
Okay, another aspect to really think about is file folder ownership and the opportunity that we have to stay organized with others that we're working with. So things to think about are things like Team Drive, which we now have available. So when you look on your left, you'll see that you have the option for Team Drive. And this is a new option that is going to kind of continue to advance. And it's a good way that a group can keep this as a team drive instead of being owned by a particular individual. So I know at the library we're going to be moving towards this as well. So if I think about the fact that I'm chairing a particular committee this year, but then it's going to transfer to a new chair next year, if it's in Team Drive, that's great because we can just update the membership and it stays there. But if it's something that's within your own drive, like one of my committee folders, you really want to think about transferring ownership to files or how you're going to organize that. So I really would like to remind you that that's an option, is you can actually transfer the ownership of something to someone else. It's pretty easy to do that. I don't want to mess up my files, but if you really look at something, and again, you've got the 3 dots on the top when you're clicked on a file or a document, you can actually go into some of the detail and you can look at who it's shared with, and then in your shared functions, which is the little share person here, you can actually go in and you can change that. So if I look at who something is shared with, I can change the ownership by just quickly going in and setting a new owner for something. So I think this is helpful, and it's really good when folks move in different positions or leave the university, that you're able to give the ownership to someone else, so that way it's not confusing and files don't disappear on you. So that's a really good one to consider.
Absolutely. That's well said. All right. Well, I'm going to bid all of you a very fond farewell, and hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll look to stay in touch.
Thanks, everybody.